All right. So, good evening. It is May 2nd, and once again, I am not on a regular time schedule of any sort. Just try to do these on Saturdays. So, if people filter in, awesome, great, glad to have you. Um, if you don't know who I am Robert Bone, and I am an officially credentialed pastor with the Assemblies of God. And actually, hang on one sec. As hopefully you're able to see, I have my official certificate of ministry now. I got that a couple days ago and decided to replace my old Full Sail University uh, um, graduate certificate because that has done me nothing. So, anyways, I have a feeling this is going to do a whole lot more for me in my life. And as God kind of directs and continues working in my life. So, yeah, it's exciting. Okay, enough of that. So we are we are in First Timothy chapter 5, and um if you were here last week, we did a little bit on we did chapter 4 and talking about making sure that people who were overseers live by certain standards. um Paul encouraging Timothy to stay true to the doctrine that he was taught, not to be led astray, and to make sure that he was being diligent, as 15 says, and to give himself wholly, completely to all these things, so that everybody can see his progress, and so that he can not only save himself but those he's teaching as well, and how important that is, especially for leaders, especially for pastors, to make sure that we are following the Bible, that that um, we're not injecting our own opinions as truth, as interpretation of the Bible. We need to make sure that we keep hold to the truth of the Bible and constantly ask the Spirit of God if what we're saying is true, if what where we're being guided is right. Otherwise, we need to back up and take a step back and just make sure, you know, that we're not leading people astray, because the Bible says that we have a bigger responsibility than those who don't teach. All right, so First Timothy chapter 5. And we're just going to start there in verse 1, get it going. And it says, "Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him, yeah, I think that's how you said it, but exhort him as if he were your father." We're going to stop right there because that next sentence bleeds into verse 2. So do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. All right, so what this is saying, is that I think when we're talking to our peers, right? When we're talking to our peers, when we're talking to people our same age, we get into this idea of, we get into these heated arguments, maybe if we disagree on something. And I think what he's talking about here is probably specifically, um, as an overseer, right? I think that's the general purpose of the letter, is for Paul to instruct Timothy as an overseer and as a church leader. And so when he's telling Timothy not to rebuke an older man harshly, um, Timothy was a younger man, as we know from previous chapters. And so it would have been very easy for him to get probably in somebody's face who was closer to his age and start saying, like, "What are you doing? Stop doing that. You're messing up. That's not the way you need to be acting." And so what Paul is saying is, when you come to an older man, don't do that, right? Don't have that kind of harsh attitude. Why? Because um, Paul understood that it's important for younger men to treat their elders with respect. Um, now that doesn't mean that every older person is completely deserving of respect, because I've seen some mean, grumpy, terrible older guys. And I think it should start with respect, but if they lose that respect, then you kind of have to change up your strategy. But if you're dealing with somebody in the church and an older man is messing up, don't go in yelling and getting in his face. Paul's saying you need to go to him and just be gentle as if he were your father. And there is no way that that example I used just a few seconds ago that I would ever have talked like that to my dad. Okay? Never. Not even if he were still alive right now. There's no way I would ever talk to him like that. I would still talk to him with respect, with gentleness, even if he were wrong. Okay? And so um, it's so important, because if you come at older men in that way, I mean, they're one older guys. They've lived a long time. They don't. They're not going to deal with your crap. Excuse my language if that bothers you. They're not going to deal with that. And two, it's probably just going to do more to harm them and more to turn them away from God than to help them. Okay. So it's very important that if you're rebuking an older man, that you treat him with kindness, compassion, and patience. Okay. So, rest of verse 1 and into verse 2. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Ooh, we'll get to that last one in just a second. So, treat younger men as brothers. Um, Now, if you think about your brother, if you have brothers, then you know that you're not always going to treat them with the most gentle spirit. Okay. But even with my brothers, I have two of them. One is 5 years older than I am, and the other is 9 years older than I am. And for me to treat younger men as brothers, maybe I wouldn't be as gentle as I would with an older man. Um, but I'm still gonna love them, right? I'm still gonna come to them with issues. Uh, I might be a little more stern. I might be a little more in their face, but I'm still gonna love them and still gonna treat them with dignity and respect, even if I have to kind of get a point across with a little more insistence. Let's call it. All right, and then older women as mothers. Okay, older women in the church, treat with kindness, right? Treat with respect. And I currently I work at a Presbyterian church, and there's a lot of older women there, and the older women, like I treat almost as my own mother. Um, I just have that fondness with them. I have that real gentleness with them, and I never really, even if they're maybe mistaken on something, even if they don't quite understand what they're saying, because they don't understand my process in the job that I do there. uh, I'm still careful not to I try not to make them feel bad, right? I try not to embarrass them because they're important. And God considers them precious, and I think that there is just a something very special about treating older women who may not even be related to you with that kind of attitude. All right, and younger women as sisters. Now, guys, if you're single guys out here, you need to really pay attention to this one. Okay, especially in churches, treat the younger women as sisters. Okay, don't treat them like a potential date candidate. Even if maybe that happens, I'm not speaking on that. Okay. You just listen to God's voice in where God's directing you in that, but treat them as sisters. Now, as a guy, I have found that this is very helpful in keeping my mind focused on where it needs to be. Okay. So if I look at a woman as a child of God, as a in the church as a spiritual sister, okay, that I don't want to make it gross. Sorry. Um, it, if that's how I view women in general, right? It's a whole lot harder for me to think of them in other ways, if that makes sense. And ladies, if you listen to this and if you don't understand what I'm saying and that sounds gross, like, look, that's just the way that guys are. Okay. It's not like guys are going around lusting after women all the time, but guys are very visually motivated. And so that's why Paul is telling Timothy to treat the younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Okay, because if you treat someone like your sister, you're not going to be thinking of them in a way that you shouldn't be. That's just the truth of the matter. All right, verse 3. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. All right, now I've read this book before, and Paul's about to go in some guidelines for general care for the women and people in need in the church. Excuse me. So he's setting it up and he's saying give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. So right off the top of the bat, he's saying um, to make sure that the people who are really in need, specifically widows, make sure that they are the ones that are being taken care of. Um, I think especially when you get into church ministry, and especially if you have benevolence programs, there's a lot of people who will try to take advantage of that or who might try to participate who maybe don't need it as much as some of the others. And I think Paul gives is going to give some really good guidelines to how this should be done because I believe that this is for us today and that these are the guidelines that we should be using within the church for how to deal with benevolence programs. So, getting into verse 4, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Okay, so I'm going to find out where this is just because I need to do my due diligence. Um, Widows and orphans. Oh, where was that? It somewhere it says true religion. This is true religion. Nope. Yeah, here we go. Okay, okay, cool. James 1:27. We're gonna go down here, and it says, James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Okay, so this is true. This is not a religion. God's word is telling us that true religion is putting our faith into practice in ways of caring for people, and also here in James to keep ourselves from being polluted by the world's systems, by the world's expectations, etc. So, going back to First Timothy 5, it says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice. So this true religion that James talked about is being connected here in First Timothy chapter 5, that these people who have a widow in their family as a mother, as a grandmother, need to put their true religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents. Look, when you're a kid, you get a lot of things for free. You get a lot of care for free. Now, obviously, it's a parent's right and responsibility both to care for their children, but we need to understand that that those gifts were still given to us. My mom cared for me. My mom did, and dad both did what they could to feed me, to clothe me, to give me a place to live. Um, and so by my responsibility now that my mom is older, my dad's gone, my mom is older, it is my responsibility, and I'm doing this um, to help take care of my mom because I owe her a debt. Maybe people don't see it that way, but I absolutely owe her a debt, and one that I probably won't be able to fully repay. Um, and so that if I serve God, right, if I love God, then it is right and pleasing for me to repay my mom for everything that she did while I was under her care. Okay. So Paul is pointing out that it is the child's and the grandchild's responsibilities to care for anyone in their family who is a widow. And my mom's a widow. And so, especially because my dad's gone, he can't provide for my mom anymore or help provide, however you want to view that. Um, I and the rest of my brothers and sisters have a responsibility to help care for my mom. Okay. And as I already said, Paul points out that this is pleasing to God. Verse 5 says, "The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help." Now, look, contextually, things are a little bit different now than they used to be. As I understand it, at this time when this was written, there weren't a whole lot of opportunities. There were some, I believe, for women to make money, but not necessarily have a quote unquote career at the time, where they could have a profession and they could maybe own their own business. Or I don't know all the ins and outs, okay, but I understand that in a lot of ways women didn't have as much opportunity back then as they do now. And so my mom now, she has the ability to continue working. She might be getting to the point where she might not be able to work for too much longer. Um, but she is she is able to work, but she can't work enough and in a job that pays well enough to pay everything that she needs to pay for. Which is why we help her. So my mom, who is a widow, who is really in need, um, she does put her hope in God. She absolutely puts her hope in God for provision, and she continues day and night to pray and ask for God's help. Um, I believe that with all my heart. She hasn't said as much to me specifically, um, but I believe that she does. Um, but that just points out that she is a widow who really is in need. And so a just one more final thought on that is that a widow in the church, right? I think this is specifically um, talking to Timothy in regards to people in the church. The widow who is really in need, left all alone, puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. And so I think what he's sort of saying there is that her children, her grandchildren, and even those who are in the church and know her and care for her, um, need to be an answer to that prayer. Verse 6, "But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives." So Paul is making a contrast. First, he mentions a widow who puts her hope and faith in God, okay, because she doesn't have a husband anymore to help provide. Um, but she recognizes God is the one who provides. And then you have this other side of a widow who lives for pleasure. And he says she is dead even while she lives. So a widow who lives for pleasure. Now that doesn't necessarily, I think, mean a widow who's going around sleeping with other men, right? I think this could be a woman who or a widow um, who finds finds pleasure in buying things, who enjoys the finer things in life, the more um, I don't know what you want to call it, ritzy stuff, the higher end stuff that she might spend money on to make her life more interesting or fun or filled with stuff rather than God. Okay. But Paul says she is dead even while she lives. So, in other words, one way or another, whether this is a widow who is just going around sleeping around with other men, or buying things to satisfy her need for finer things and items and stuff, um, has emptied her of what she really needs. Right? She's a woman who is more focused on the world and what the world has to offer rather than um, the God who provides for those in need. And because of that, uh, basically what that's saying, I think, is that she's going to run out of money. She's not going to be able to provide for herself, even with the little that she's able to bring in, or even the little that her parents, or excuse me, her kids or grandkids help her with. And verse 7 says, "Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame." Um, give the people these instructions so that no one will be open to blame. Verse 8, anyone who does not provide for their relatives. Okay, so I think this verse 7 is referring to what he's about to say. So give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So Paul's making a really strong statement here, pointing out that if you don't provide for your relatives, right, those blood relatives, those people who are in need that are related to you, and especially for your own household. Okay, so um, my mom doesn't live in my household, but she is my relative. I have uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters who are my relatives who aren't in my household. So Paul's saying that providing for those people, if they're in need, if they need a little help and we have the means to help them, we need to do that. Specifically, relatives. Paul's putting a lot of emphasis on people who are related to you. And I get like there are some bad relationships out there. There are people out there who maybe hate their mothers. I hope not, but that's a possibility. Or maybe they just don't have a good relationship with maybe a brother or sister or an aunt or an uncle, whatever it is. But Paul doesn't give any stipulations here. He doesn't give any conditions upon which you are supposed to help your relatives. He just says you need to provide for your relatives. And you don't do it necessarily for them. You do it in obedience to God because God, the word tells us that God is pleased when we do this. Okay. But then he goes on and he says, especially for their own household. If you're not providing for your household, right? Now, if you're a kid, that's different. Um, my son is 14. He's coming up on 15. About 6 more months. So I guess not really coming up on, but he's coming up on 15. Another year or so, he might have a job. A year and a half, 2 years, he might have a job. Um, Now when he does, his mom and I are probably going to require that he helps out the household a little bit because if he's earning money and he doesn't have a lot of bills and things to pay for, it would be right for him to help this household. Um, don't worry, say that maybe some of you are freaking out. Don't worry, I'm not going to make him pay like $200 a month, like some sort of rent, right? Just getting used to being fiscally responsible and understanding his um, his mandate uh, as a um, man who's out on his own and one day maybe starting a family to put money towards supporting those that he lives with. Okay. So um, either way, so this applies especially for moms and dads, right? The men and women of the house is to support the household. If you are perfectly able to work and you choose not to work, um, the word says that you've denied the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. That is a harsh sentence and that is a harsh accusation. But I don't believe that it's an accusation. I believe that it's speaking the truth. That if you're able to provide for your household, provide for your living situation and those who are living with you, to provide food and money towards rent and everything, and you're choosing not to, okay, that that the word says that you're worse than an unbeliever because you know what you're supposed to be doing and you're not doing it. You're not providing the very basic needs for those you're living with. All right, I'm gonna grab a water, grab a drink. Whew. Okay, let me breathe for just a second. Oh man, I can already feel my voice getting hoarse. I don't like it. All right, verse 9. We'll keep going here. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband. We'll keep going. And is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. All right. Whew. Let's take this a little bit. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60. So, I don't know if any church does it this way. I don't know if any church keeps a list of widows, but I almost wonder if we're missing out on something, if we're not doing something we should be doing. It seems like Paul's instructing Timothy to not only put widows on this list of widows with certain criteria, but just the fact that he's saying, "Hey, on your list of widows that you keep, um, here's the guidelines for how you do that." So clearly, there is a list of widows, and again, I don't see churches doing it. My own church doesn't do this, and maybe I should start it. Right? I could start it, but that's maybe we need to start working on this a little bit as the Big C church. Because again, even though women have more opportunities and ability, um, like there's something missing if we are not at least trying to make sure that widows are being taken care of. Obviously, we need to go according to what Paul's outlining here, but man, uh, we need to look into that. Okay. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60. So here we go. Paul's saying that if she's over 60, great, put her on the list. Because I think that when you reach a certain age, right, it gets a lot harder to work if you can work at all. Um, and so, especially if they're over 60, make sure that she's on there, right, so that you can keep track of her and start paying attention to when they need help. But the interesting thing is that Paul continues on and he's requiring certain character traits in order for a widow to be on there. And like I you know what? Let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. Has been faithful to her husband. Okay. So in other words, this widow who's over 60 needs to have been faithful to her husband. right? And so if she cheated on her husband, slept around, was unfaithful to her husband, it sounds like Paul's saying don't put her on there because she was living in sin. She was being disobedient to God, which disqualifies her for this support. Verse 10, and is well known for her good deeds. So she's got to be like in really good standing, that she has to be well known for her good deeds. And I don't necessarily think that if she was sort of known for good deeds that she would automatically be disqualified. But probably certainly if she was known for being terrible and being rude and being ungrateful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that that she would be disqualified for this list. Um, but he lists out the good deeds that he's talking about, such as bringing up children, okay, being faithful as a mother, right? Very important. Showing hospitality, letting people into your home. I tell you what, this bothers me in today um, because we have lost something so personable as a culture because nobody is hospitable anymore. Not nobody, but like very few people are hospitable. Very few people want to let you into their homes. Very few people are happy to see you suddenly drop by unannounced, um, and be expected to to entertain, right? So so showing hospitality is one of those qualifications that this widow needs to have. Um, Man, I feel like a lot of widows today would be disqualified on this alone. Maybe I'm just in the wrong circles. I don't know. If you watch this, let me know. Like, are you around people who are happy and excited to let other people into their homes? That'd be interesting. I'd be interested to know if that's the case. Washing the feet of the Lord's people. Again, I think this is culturally contextual. Dusty roads, garbage, animal feces on the road that people are stepping in. And so these widows who are known for the good deeds would have been washing the feet of the Lord's people as a kindness, as a servant act, helping those in trouble. So being faithful and helpful herself, right? So in order for her to be qualified for this list of widows, she needs to have good deeds such as helping those in trouble, um, having been known to help those um, who needed it when she had the means to help them. And this is this process of reciprocity, right? Where you give and you get in return, which makes total sense. And devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. So Paul's saying this list is not exclusive, right? Anything I didn't mention that are good deeds, like count those as well. Verse 11, as for younger widows, okay, as for younger widows, do not put them on such a list. Okay, so earlier, Paul said only if they're over 60. Okay, so basically 60 or below 60, um, probably don't put them on. And if they're really young, especially don't put them on. Don't put them on the list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. So I'm just going to tell this how it is. Men and women, when they're young, um, they want to have sex. Okay. That's just, everybody knows it. That's not a secret. And so Paul's saying that, like, look, Timothy, you need to recognize that the younger widows, um, don't put them on this list because as their desires start to overcome them, they're going to want to marry. And I don't think Paul's saying um, that this is automatically, maybe in the next verse it kind of points to that, but I don't necessarily think that this is automatically a bad thing because I think Paul understands that because of their sensual desires, they're going to want to marry because they're going to want to be faithful to the Lord in having uh in doing those things right within a godly confine uh of marriage rather than outside of marriage, right? So they're going to want to hurry up and marry again so they can fulfill those desires. Now, verse 12, this is where it gets a little bit interesting because this is kind of confusing, but let's see if we can work some of this out. Verse 12 says, "Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge." Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. So so a young lady gets married, becomes a widow because her husband dies, and when their sensual desires overcome their dedicate. Oh, you know what? I forgot to talk about their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ. But again, I don't think necessarily that Paul's saying that that's inherently evil, because elsewhere in the Bible it talks about, if you're able to not get married and you're able to control your natural desires, then this is a good thing for you to do and everything. But bringing judgment on themselves simply for the fact that um, it's a break of that initial first pledge, because that's God's plan, right? God's plan is for us to have one spouse for our entire lives. And again, that's not saying that it's the woman's fault because the man died. I think it's just speaking sort of broadly, sort of as an example, um, not necessarily full on condemning the woman for wanting to remarry. I could be wrong on that. If anybody has any other ideas or insight to that, feel free to let me know in the comments or live chat if you pop in. Verse 13. Okay, we'll move on. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. Okay, so still talking about younger widows, and they get into the habit of being idle, probably because they can't. Yeah, or I don't know. Maybe that's just a natural consequence of being youthful, right? Maybe you just if you don't have a husband to if you're a widow and you don't have a husband to provide for you, then you're going to be getting into the habit of being idle because maybe you can't work, and so maybe you don't know what else to do with your time. And then it says going about from house to house. I don't necessarily think this is talking about sleeping around. I think it could just be visiting, visiting friend after friend, or people she knows. Uh, in other words, not even taking care of her own house, right? Not even making sure the place that she's living in is taken care of, that she's making effort toward getting money and being faithful and things like that. And then not only do they become idlers, and idlers just means somebody who is idle, right? Somebody who isn't doing a whole lot, somebody who's kind of lazy, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. And a busybody is somebody who gets into other people's business, right? Getting into other people's business, gossiping, spreading rumors, talk nonsense, right? That those things fall under talking nonsense, saying things they ought not to. Okay. So I think Paul is pointing to younger widows having tendencies like this. Not necessarily condemning all younger widows outright, but just saying this is kind of the generality of what younger widows will go through because they've lost their husband and because they maybe don't have an opportunity to uh, work to the degree that they need. Something like that. All right, verse 14. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Excuse me. All right. So Paul's saying, I think because of these generalities, because of these things that younger widows would tend to get into, to fall into, he's saying, I, I encourage younger widows to remarry, to to marry again, so that you don't fall into these things. And then so marry and then have kids, right? And manage your homes so that you're doing something productive and of value rather than being idle and getting into other people's business. Okay? And to manage their homes, so again, taking care at this time, taking care of homes, taking care of children, um, whatever else that falls under that, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander, right? Because look, men or women doing things that um maybe cast a questionable light on you, um, gives the enemy opportunity for slander, right? It gives the enemy opportunity to whisper into other people's ears and start pointing out the questionable things that's going on in your life because you're not being careful about how you conduct your business. And so Paul's just trying to get these younger widows to avoid these types of things in order that they continue to serve God faithfully and live in a position that is beneficial for their homes as well as pleasing to God. All right, in verse 15, some have in fact already turned away to follow Satan. So he's saying some of these widows, some of these younger widows have already turned away to follow Satan. They've gotten into these situations, they've gotten into um this these bad habits of like gossiping, probably sleeping around as well. Um because that's again, that's just kind of what happens to younger people. Um and and so he's saying, I don't know if he's just heard from letters between Timothy and Paul or what, but he's saying like some have already turned to follow Satan. Like some have completely left the faith because they've allowed themselves to get into these situations, and it has just carried them far enough away that they just basically turned away from the faith. Verse 16. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. All right. So I don't necessarily think that Paul's referring to a daughter or granddaughter who's caring for a widowed mom or a widowed grandmother. I would imagine there were some women who just took care of widows in their house because they were able to and because they had a soft heart for them and they wanted to help. So he's saying if any woman who is a believer, who's a follower of Christ, has widows in her care, she needs to continue to help them. Now, obviously, if they've gotten to the point where um, these women can't support these widows or themselves anymore, that probably changes the story. But he's saying if these widows have that care, make sure that these women are continuing to care for these widows so that the church can focus on those widows who don't have that care, who don't have those people who are able to provide for them financially and with time and with attention. Verse 17 says the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. All right. Now I've heard some thought on this specifically from Mike Winger. If you know who Mike Winger is, he did a video that addressed this, might have been one of his 10 questions. He did a video that addressed this, talking about how pastors should be paid. Uh, People who work in the church should be paid. And so he's saying he was saying that the worthy of double honor almost means like worthy of that monetary value, um, because of the work that they're doing within the church. But I forget if he said like if the word double came into play there, where like double what a normal day's wage would be. I'm not sure. But either way, uh, the elders who direct the affairs of the church. So not necessarily pastors, just pastors, right? But other people who are caring for the church and overseeing the church, especially those who do it well, are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. So again, if you've ever needed an argument for providing for those who are in the church, those who oversee the church, and especially those who preach and teach the church. These verses are crucial. These are critical, because even these arguments, right? Even these arguments for not giving your tithe to church, or a tithe just means providing for the people of the church, right? Who those who are in need. They take the New Testament, they take Acts, and they say, well, this is saying what tithing means. Um, that you're just providing for the people who are in need within your circles. And I don't believe that's it at all. I believe that those are extra gifts. Those are above and beyond what your tithe needs to be. And I believe because the Old Testament tithe was for providing for the Levites, who were the priests in the temple, right? Who could not earn a living outside of what they did. They devoted themselves wholly to the work of the Lord, and they relied on the tithe of the people in order to have their food, their provisions paid for. And I believe that it is the same today, that those who work in the church, those who preach, those who teach, those who lead churches, they need financial support because they deserve to have a living. I don't believe that has changed since the Old Testament. I don't believe that for a second. All right, going to get off my soapbox for just a second because we need to get back to the verses. Um, Especially for those whose work is preaching and teaching. Okay. And Paul explains why in verse 18. For scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. So, two examples here. And let's see. This first phrase is from Deuteronomy 25:4. The second phrase is from Luke 10:7. Uh, Interesting that Paul is quoting Luke's gospel, right? Okay. Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. So what this means is that the ox who is working the fields, who is literally working the fields in order for the farmer to be able to get his harvest, it's saying don't muzzle it so it can't eat while it's working. Because why? Because the ox is doing the work. It needs to be able to eat in order, and it deserves that food in repayment for the work that it's doing. And so it's this idea of don't stop the worker from earning a wage when it's doing the work, right? When it's putting in that time, when it's putting in that effort. Um, I'm going to say this, it might make some people mad. No church has the right to withhold financial payment from those who are doing large portions of the work. You might make an argument for those who are just there for a couple hours a week. Um, but those who are putting in 20 hours, 30 hours, especially 40 hours. So, like, especially your pastor, churches need to pay them. People need to pay their tithes. This is why God mandates it. This is why it is in the Bible, because you need to support the people who do the work. If you don't like that, you don't like the Bible. And then the second thing is the worker deserves his wages. So, again, the people who are putting in the time, the people who are putting in the effort deserve to be paid for what they do. It's a real simple concept here, and it seems like people just want to make it real difficult. Drives me nuts. Anyways, verse 19. Do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. You know, some people just want to stir up trouble. Some people just like giving too much attention to that chip on their shoulder. Um, and Paul recognized that unless you've got 2 or 3 people who are saying the same thing, um, don't even entertain that accusation. Don't even give it the time of day, right? Because sometimes people just have chips on their shoulders. They don't like specific people, and so they'd rather cause a little chaos. They'd rather cause some trouble than to just get the chip off their shoulder, right? So, and I think this is especially important because it's talking about an elder. It's talking about a leader in the church, and you cannot suddenly start this whole investigation, this whole uproar, this whole upending of leadership for one accusation. Um, now, if on the other side of this coin, that if you do have 2 or 3 witnesses who are saying the same thing, then yeah, it's definitely time to start looking. And there have been some churches recently that we've been hearing about who have had multiple witnesses, and there was very little, if anything, done in those churches to address that. But I won't get really into that. Verse 20. But those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that others may take warning. Okay, this is really interesting. So elsewhere, um, here we're gonna look this one up. Um, go to them privately. I always know what the Bible says. Not always, but I largely know what the Bible says. I just don't always know exactly where it is. Okay, here we go. Matthew 18:15 says, we're going to look at the whole chapter just in case we need to look at more verses than 15. It says, if your brother or sister sins, go to point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So here, Jesus Jesus is outlining a process for how to deal with sin within the kingdom of God, where if somebody is sinning, go that one person go point out their fault just between you two, and if they don't listen to you, take take 1 or 2 others along, so that there's 2 or 3 total who are going to this person to try to correct the problem. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. Tell it in front of everybody. Uh, because then there's no hiding anywhere, right? And if they refuse to listen, then basically you got to kick them out of the church. If they refuse to correct their sin, you need to get them out of there because at that point they're a cancer. And if that cancer spreads, it's going to infect more people. Okay. That's why this is here. Now let's contrast that with what's in 1 Timothy 5. And it says, but those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone so that others may take warning. So here, Paul's saying if you're dealing with elders, leaders in the church who are sinning, you skip the first couple of steps. And I don't think that we as a church at large follow this process, right? We don't have one person go to them and deal with the issue. We don't have um two or three people go then after that and try to deal with the issue. Paul's saying if you have an elder, well, that's not true. Excuse me. That's not true. Sorry. Um if you have two or three witnesses, right. Got ahead of myself. Okay. See, it's okay to be wrong. You just need to try to fix it, right? You need to admit it. If it's brought by two or three witnesses, okay? So I think what this is saying is that if there's an accusation of an elder and it probably going to the overseer. So I believe that first Timothy was, I think, the guy, right? The overseer. And he's saying that if a couple, two or three people come to you, Timothy, who have an accusation against an elder, then look into it. And if you find that those elders are sinning, then you go and reprove those elders before everyone. So it's maybe skipping one step, right? Um, where if there's an accusation against an elder, that one person shouldn't necessarily go to that elder, right, and have that conversation. But if a couple people go to the guy above that elder, who's Timothy, then Timothy needs to go and reprove that person before everyone. And reprove, I believe, just means to correct, to yeah, to scold, correct, express disapproval, often gently. Okay, so Timothy is being instructed here to reprove this elder before everyone. Take him before the church and say, "Hey, look, we know what you're doing. We've had these accusations. We know what you're doing. This is wrong, and we really want to see you um, fix this." And that's so, Paul says, so that the others may take warning. And I think when he says the others, I don't think he's talking about the 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 people of the church, the congregation. I think he's talking about the other elders. To where, look, if you mess up, um, if you screw up and you're getting some accusations, then you're gonna have to stand where this guy is standing. And you're gonna have everybody looking at you, and you're gonna have me correcting you in front of everybody. Um, and very few, if any, people would ever look forward to that. So it's almost like a warning, like, hey, don't do this. We don't want to have to do this to you. But Paul's telling Timothy to do this in order to keep sin from entering the church, in order to keep the church and its leaders accountable and righteous in the eyes of God. All right, verse 21 says, I I charge you in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels to keep these instructions without partiality and to do nothing out of favoritism. All right. Partiality. I think I know what that means, but partiality is a bias, prejudice, or unfair inclination of favor of one person, right? So, in other words, Paul's saying, as God is as God as your witness, even before the angels, keep these instructions um, even and complete across the board. Just because you like a particular elder, just because you like a particular leader, uh, don't don't show them leniency, right? Don't let them get off scot free just because you like them. Do nothing out of favoritism, and I think that's really important because if you do that, you're going to keep a lot of peace in your church, and you're also going to make sure that people don't look at you um, out of skepticism because you decided to treat somebody better even though they committed a the same sin or a worse sin. um, and they, gosh, I forgot where I was going with that. um, essentially essentially Timothy just needed to be even-handed with his instructions. Okay. Verse 22. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, and do not share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Now, I've read this before, laying on of hands, almost um as like we call laying of hands, like putting our hands on people and praying over them. I don't think that's what this is talking about. This is talking about laying on of hands uh, as in accusing, or um, as in, how do I say this? Sorry, guys. I'm my brain's just in a fog. It's been a crazy week. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands. So you know, how, like when somebody says, "Don't put your hands on me," like when they try to like grab them, if somebody tries to grab somebody else or like take a hold of them because they did something wrong, or because they're trying to, maybe a cop's trying to arrest somebody or something. And so I think that it's more that sort of thing, where you're laying on of hands, as in you're trying to um, stop someone or physically restrain them because of something that they did. And so Paul's saying, don't be hasty in doing that. Don't be hasty in physical confrontations. Um, don't be hasty in in confrontation in general, probably, or even accusation. Um, but then he goes on and says, "Do not share in the sins of others." So, do not share in the sins of others. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, and do not share in the sins of others. So even these things that other people are doing, make sure Timothy needs to make sure that he's not getting involved while he's trying to correct. Right? Don't get wrapped up in the stuff that everybody else is doing, and that's the same for us, especially church leaders. Um, if you're dealing with a lot of people, and those people have a lot of different sins that are going on in their lives, do not get wrapped in that. Make sure to keep himself pure, as it says right there in 22. Keep himself, and we need to keep ourselves unmixed. Pure means unmixed. So keep ourselves unmixed from the drama, from the sins, from the flaws that of the people that leaders are over. And again, as I said before, this book is not necessarily just for leaders. There are plenty of principles and things here, if not everything, that we need to apply to ourselves, even if we're um, uh, just just followers of Christ who aren't in any leadership positions. Verse 23. Stop drinking only water and use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. So, you know what? I like that Paul gives a little health advice here. This is good. And something tells me that maybe Timothy, because he was trying to stay pure, because he was trying so hard to prove himself, maybe that he was worthy of the position that he was in, and he was right to have the position that he was in, even though he was young, that maybe he abstained from alcohol. And it's interesting, right? That Paul tells him, stop drinking only water. It's almost like he's saying, and I don't know if this is truly the case because the word doesn't tell us, but it's almost like he was saying, like, I know you're trying to be pure, and I know you're trying your hardest to stay away from alcohol because it can produce bad things. But he's saying, don't s- don't stop drinking only water. It's okay to use a little wine to help your stomach feel better and to help keep you from getting these frequent illnesses that apparently Timothy was getting. Um, so again, this is another one of those verses that points to the pure the sole act of consuming alcohol is not wrong. And I know that there's Christians out there who would disagree with me, but the Bible points again and again and again that the why do I keep saying pure? The sole act of consuming alcohol is not wrong. It is getting drunk. It is allowing it to have control over your life. It is allowing it to alter your state of consciousness. Okay. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. Verse 24, the sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail behind them. I'm going to read that again with verse 25. The sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail behind them. In the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever. This is really interesting. So, if we think about this, the sins of some are obvious. So, let's take this a little bit at a time. The sins of some are obvious, which means that there are some sins that people do that are right in your face, glaring, really easy to see. Reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. So, uh, and then it's a semicolon, which means this is sort of a separate thought. So if we put these two parts together, the sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. So these obvious sins, these things that are blatant and out in the open, reaches the place of judgment ahead of them. Ahead of, I think, them being the people. So it's almost like these obvious sins are so out there that that they are going to bring trouble on them quickly, right? Because people can see them, leaders know they're there, and so they can correct them, and it brings their sin brings judgment on them almost like right away because they're there. And then he says the sins of others trail behind them. And if we give that context to the latter part of 25, where he says good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever. So it's almost like the sins of others trail behind them means sins that remain hidden, which we know that there are some sins that people commit that are hidden and it's not obvious. And so it may not bring judgment on them right away. But we know God's word tells us that even what is hidden will be made known, essentially. So he's saying there's sins that are so obvious that they're out in front and reaching the place of judgment ahead of the people committing them. And then there are sins that trail behind them that are hidden that they won't be known for some time. Um, but eventually they will be known and they'll their sins will catch up with the people. And then he goes and says, in the same way, good deeds are obvious. So there are some good deeds that are obvious out in front of people that people know, they can see, they can appreciate. And then he says, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever. So it's almost like Paul is encouraging Timothy that even your good deeds that aren't obvious, that remain hidden, um, they're not going to remain hidden forever. Whether sometime in this life And God's word tells us that we shouldn't let our uh, right hand know what our left hand's doing. I might have had those switch, but uh, same principle either way, right? So in other words, be secretive about your good deeds because you're trying to please God, not man. But I think Paul's saying that your good deeds that you do in this life aren't going to go unrewarded or unappreciated, even if they're hidden, because eventually it's almost like somebody's going to find out and somebody's going to be able to appreciate what you've been doing. Um, But even if that's not what he's specifically saying, what he would be saying otherwise is that the good deeds that you do are still going to be rewarded by God in eternity, right? That in heaven, God's going to reward all those good things that you did, whether they're known or whether they're not. And I think there's something very special about keeping your good deeds hidden and leaving them hidden because it reveals a true state of our heart, right? When we're not trying to let anyone know about the good things that we do, it reveals the state of our heart that we are truly trying to please God rather than people. So, uh, and I don't know. I'm going to check real quick if this has some context in the next chapter. Those under the yoke of slavery should consider that respect. Yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect. Lead masters, disrespect. So that might kind of connect to that. But at the very least, it seems like Paul's just trying to encourage Timothy that all the goodness that Timothy's doing, like it's gonna be rewarded. And whether it's out in front and you get recognized by people, or if you are keeping your good deeds hidden and you're just gonna be recognized by God, it's almost like he's saying just keep doing good things, right? Just keep doing good things and be aware of sins. I think in that same breath, he's warning Timothy um, of sin as well. I don't necessarily think that he's making just a comparison between the two in the same sort of wording. So, anyways, that is the end of First Timothy chapter 5. Hopefully, I didn't drone on for too long. Hopefully, this was entertaining and fun for you, and you were able to follow along. And hopefully, all this made sense, um, at least to the best of my ability. And hopefully, next week, when we do First Timothy chapter 6, I won't be so tired, and I will be able to have a little more clear thought, be able to speak my words a little bit better. So, if you watch this, please pray for me. It's been rough. All right. That's it for me. I will see you.